How powerful was the emperor of mankind? It's a question that haunts me every night. I witnessed the Battle of Ulanor firsthand, not as a hero, but as a humble remembrancer, tasked with recording his deeds. Official chronicles speak of a glorious triumph, the emperor striking down the orc warlord with a flaming sword, a tale of heroism retold for children across countless worlds. Yet what I truly saw that day was far beyond legend, a power so overwhelming it defies imagination.
When the orc charged, the emperor of mankind barely moved. A simple raise of his hand, no effort, no struggle, and reality itself shattered. The massive greenskin did not die, it simply ceased to exist. Even the Primarchs, mighty demigod sons of the emperor, trembled and averted their eyes at this display of incomprehensible power. This is the terrifying scale of the emperor's might, a force beyond legend, feared and revered across the galaxy. Even speaking these words feels like incantation, a summons to powers I have spent decades trying to forget. You have heard the stories, the great victory over the Greenskin Empire, the elevation of Horus Lupercal to War Master, the Emperor's return to Terra to oversee his secret project beneath the palace. This was a pivotal moment in Imperial history, recorded and retold countless times over 10,000 years. Yet the truth, the reality of what occurred at Ulanor, is far stranger, far more terrifying than any legend could capture.
What you have heard is merely a shadow, a comforting falsehood. I know, for I helped craft it. The official Rememberer accounts speak of the Emperor's martial prowess that day, how he faced the orc warlord Urlach Urg in single combat and struck him down with his flaming sword. A heroic battle between humanity's master and the beast that sought to devour us all. It makes for a fine legend, but the truth, the reality of Ulanor, is far darker, far more incomprehensible than any story ever told.
Children across a million worlds may sleep better for it, believing the comforting tales. But the truth is far simpler and infinitely more terrifying. I was there, a mere rememberer among the mortal contingent, armed only with a data slate and a Vox recorder, tasked with documenting the spectacle for posterity. One insignificant face among the sea of humanity, witnessing as gods walked among us. Even the preparations alone were staggering in scale, a display of power and authority beyond comprehension.
An entire valley had been transformed into a parade ground, vast enough to host the combined might of multiple legion detachments. Hundreds of thousands of Imperial army troops stood in flawless formation, so precise that from my vantage point, they resembled golden fields of wheat, shimmering under the Ulanor sun. Despite the choking dust that blanketed the world, every uniform was immaculate, a testament to the discipline and grandeur of the Imperium. This was not merely a battle, it was an awe-inspiring spectacle of order, power, and unyielding authority. An entire valley had been transformed into a parade ground, vast enough to host the combined might of multiple legion detachments. Hundreds of thousands of Imperial army troops stood in flawless formation, so precise that from my vantage point, they resembled golden fields of wheat, shimmering under the Ulanor sun. Despite the choking dust that blanketed the world, every uniform was immaculate, a testament to the discipline and grandeur of the Imperium. This was not merely a battle. It was an awe-inspiring spectacle of order, power, and unyielding authority.
And then came the Astartes, the Space Marines, the Angels of Death. No image, no captured scene, no written description can truly convey the awe and terror of standing in their presence. These superhuman warriors embodied the Emperor's will, a living testament to the might and discipline of the Imperium. To witness them was to understand the scale of power that mortals could only dream of. Each Space Marine was a monument to genetic mastery, towering over mortal men, their armor gleaming with the heraldry of their legions. Their stillness alone was more intimidating than any act of aggression could ever be. Yet even they were dwarfed by their gene fathers, the Primarchs, demigods made flesh. I remember Magnus the Red, his single eye blazing like a newborn star, radiating power and authority that no mortal could withstand. To witness them was to stand before legends made real, a humbling and terrifying testament to the Emperor's will. Sanguinius, his magnificent wings casting shadows that defied physics. Mortarion, a harbinger of death whose presence made the very air feel thin in my lungs. Angron, barely contained violence made flesh. Dorn, Corax, the Khan, each a being of such overwhelming presence that looking upon them directly felt like a part of your mind breaking. To witness the Primarchs was to confront power on a scale mortals could scarcely comprehend, a living testament to the Emperor's unmatched authority. The realization hit with unbearable clarity. We were infinitely small, insignificant, mere specks in a universe of power. And yet, even the Primarchs, the mighty demigods, were but satellites orbiting the true sun of that gathering, the Emperor of mankind. How does one describe him? His presence alone bends reality, inspires awe, and shatters comprehension. To witness the Emperor is to confront power on a scale that mortals were never meant to grasp. I have spent 60 years searching for the words. Even now, my hands shake as I attempt to commit this to record. It is not fear alone that causes this tremor. It is the fundamental inadequacy of language itself. He appeared as a man. All accounts agree on this, yet that statement is as meaningless as saying a sun is merely light in the sky. The understatement borders on blasphemy. To describe the Emperor of mankind in mere words is to confront the impossible, a being whose scale, presence, and power defy comprehension.
The first thing you must understand is that he did not need to speak to command attention. He did not need to move to dominate every space he occupied. His physical form, magnificent though it was merely the smallest part of his presence. When the Emperor of mankind walked onto the plains of Ulanor that day, I felt him before I saw him, a presence so vast, so overwhelming, that it defies description. To witness it was to confront the very embodiment of authority, power, and divinity in the Grimdark universe of Warhammer 40K.
We all felt it, a pressure behind the eyes, a sudden, unshakable awareness of vast attention focusing on this single point in space and time. The air itself became charged, not with electricity, but with meaning. It was as if reality itself suddenly remembered it was being observed and stood straighter, more rigid, under the weight of the Emperor's gaze. To witness such power is to confront a presence that bends perception, commanding reverence and awe in ways no mortal can articulate. I remember thinking, in that moment of his arrival, that I finally understood why some men fall to their knees before manifestations of the divine. It was not worship, it was structural integrity. Standing in his presence required effort, as though gravity itself had multiplied tenfold around him. His armor gleamed gold, but it was more than metal. His countenance was noble, stern, and beautiful beyond the capacity of mortal genetics. To see the Emperor of mankind was to confront perfection incarnate, a being whose scale, presence, and power reshaped reality itself.
The features captured in countless frescoes and statues across the Imperium are lies, not because they are wrong, but because they are incomplete. To look upon the Emperor of mankind was to see not only what stood before you, but every possibility of what could be. His face was paradoxical, simultaneously youthful and ancient, kind and merciless, familiar yet utterly alien, a visage that defies comprehension, revealing the full scale of a being whose presence transcends mortal understanding.
To focus on any single aspect of the Emperor of mankind was to see the others shift, like reflections rippling across disturbed water. He was a living kaleidoscope of human potential, simultaneously in motion and yet perfectly still, a being whose presence defies comprehension and whose power reshapes reality itself. The great triumph at Ulanor was as much a ceremonial display as it was a demonstration of sheer power. The Emperor of mankind sat upon a massive golden throne constructed for the occasion. Not the dreaded golden throne of Terra, but perhaps a symbolic precursor. Legions of space marines marched in flawless formation, while tanks and titans thundered past, shaking the very earth with each step. The sound should have been deafening, yet in the presence of the Emperor, I cannot recall hearing any of it. Reality itself seemed to bend around His Majesty. All senses seemed muted in the presence of the Emperor of mankind, as if the universe itself were holding its breath. Hours passed, yet time itself felt distorted, stretched and folded by his overwhelming presence. Then came a moment that would forever alter my understanding of existence. It was not scheduled. It was not part of the carefully orchestrated pageantry. It was something far beyond human comprehension, a revelation of the Emperor's true power and the scale of his authority. In retrospect, I wonder if the Emperor of mankind had always known that the entire spectacle of Ulanor was arranged for no purpose other than what was about to unfold. The orc attack came suddenly, emerging from hidden bunkers that Imperial forces had somehow failed to detect during their meticulous sweep of the area. Chaos erupted, yet in the Emperor's presence, even the sudden onslaught seemed part of a larger, unfathomable design. It was not a full-scale assault. The Greenskin Empire had already been broken. This was something else, a final, desperate act of defiance, a suicide mission aimed at striking at the heart of the Imperium during its moment of triumph. At the forefront strode the largest orc I had ever seen, even greater than the warlord whose death had sparked the celebration. A monstrous figure clad in crude metal, roaring a challenge that seemed to shake the very air itself. Later accounts would call him Erlak Erg, though I never heard the name spoken aloud. Names were meaningless in what followed. The Emperor of Mankind stood. That simple action, rising from his seat, silenced everything. Not just voices, but thoughts. The universe itself seemed to contract, focusing entirely on him. What came next has often been called a battle, yet words fail to capture the scale and incomprehensibility of what transpired. Official histories claim the Emperor of Mankind drew his sword, clashing with the orc warlord in a battle of strength and skill. They speak of blows exchanged, a heroic contest of might. None of it is true. The Emperor raised his hand, simple, palm outward, a motion one might use to request silence or signal a pause. The orc was perhaps 200 meters away when this occurred. Reality itself seemed to bend to his will. That single gesture erased what mere mortals understood as battle.
The orc charged forward, propelled by pistons, muscles, and unbridled rage, a green avalanche of destruction. And then it simply ceased to exist. There was no flash of light, no psychic thunderbolt, no dramatic explosion. One moment the beast roared its defiance, the next it was gone. Not even dust remained. Nothing, as though it had never existed. Such was the terrifying, incomprehensible power of the Emperor of Mankind. The absolute negation of the orc's existence was so complete that I questioned whether I had truly seen it at all. The silence that followed was not merely the absence of sound, it was the absence of everything, as though reality itself had forgotten how to function for a brief moment. What struck me most was the lack of effort. The Emperor of Mankind had not strained, braced, or even gathered his power in any way perceptible to those watching. He simply willed it, and the universe obeyed. The Emperor of Mankind had simply willed the orc out of existence, and the universe obeyed without question. It was then that I noticed the Primarchs, these demigods, perfect beings engineered for conquest and rule, were kneeling, not as part of any ceremonial order, but like frightened children. Some bowed so low their heads nearly touched the ground. Others trembled visibly, overwhelmed by the sheer, incomprehensible authority of the Emperor.
Magnus the Red, the most psychically gifted of all the Primarchs, pressed his hands against his temples, a trickle of blood running from his single eye. The demigods had witnessed something beyond mortal comprehension, an effect of the power that had unmade the orc. Then the emperor's gaze fell upon the assembled masses. I cannot describe what it felt like when his attention passed over me. The sensation defies categorization, a force that bends perception and shatters understanding in ways no words could convey.
It was not physical, not a weight, pressure, or pain, though it contained elements of all these sensations. The Emperor of Mankind's attention transcended the limits of mortal perception, imposing itself on body, mind, and soul simultaneously. To experience it was to confront something entirely beyond understanding, a force both gentle and utterly relentless. It was a sudden, horrific understanding. Everything I was, everything I had ever been, every thought, feeling, and secret was completely exposed. Not examined, not judged, simply known. The Emperor of Mankind's comprehension was total, so complete that my own understanding of myself felt like a child's crayon drawing in comparison. To experience it was to confront a presence beyond all mortal perception. For the briefest fraction of a second, I experienced what it meant to be truly seen by the Emperor of Mankind, not as a remembrancer, not as a human, but as something entirely exposed and comprehended. His gaze stripped away all roles, all masks, revealing the essence of existence itself. But as a collection of atoms temporarily arranged into a pattern complex enough to generate consciousness, a fleeting arrangement he could alter or erase with less effort than I would expend to brush away an insect, I understood what the Primarchs already knew. The Emperor of Mankind was not merely superhuman. He was not just a psyker of unparalleled power. He was something entirely beyond mortal comprehension, a being whose very presence reshapes reality and perception alike. He was something else entirely, beyond name, beyond understanding. The gap between him and even his most gifted sons was not one of degree, but of fundamental nature. The rest of the day passed in a blur. The formalities continued. Horus was elevated to War Master. Speeches were given, honors bestowed. I recorded it all automatically, my hands moving while my mind remained frozen in that singular moment of revelation, the true scale of the Emperor of Mankind. What I had witnessed was not merely the Emperor of Mankind's power of creation or destruction. It was his absolute dominion over reality itself, a kind of authority that does not persuade, overcome, or defeat. It simply is, and all existence bends around it like light around a singularity. That night, alone in my quarters, I reviewed my recordings and found something disturbing. The incident with the orc was not there, not a trace. Reality itself had erased it, leaving only the memory seared into my mind. In its place was footage of the Emperor of Mankind engaging the creature in conventional combat, striking it down with his sword in a display of martial skill. A heroic scene, perfectly composed, dramatically satisfying. But it had never happened. I checked other recordings and spoke with fellow remembrancers. Everyone remembered the same falsified version of events, a narrative rapidly solidifying into the official truth. The Emperor's true power remained hidden, incomprehensible, and utterly beyond mortal documentation. By morning, I began to doubt my own recollection. Had I imagined it? Had the overwhelming psychic presence of the Emperor and his Primarch sons
caused a hallucination? Was I suffering from a stress reaction, common among mortals in the presence of beings so far beyond comprehension? The line between reality and memory blurred, leaving only the haunting certainty that what I had witnessed defied every law of existence.
It was then that I realized I was being watched. Not openly, no custodians at my door, no interrogators demanding answers, but through subtler means. My orders shifted without warning, my duties reassigned, access to key figures quietly revoked, every change wrapped in the language of bureaucracy. I was being isolated, studied, tested, to see if I would speak of what I had seen on Ulanor, of what only I seemed to remember. I did not. Some deep instinct for survival kept me silent. I played my part, recorded the cleansed, official version of events, and signed my name beneath the lies that would echo across the newborn Imperium. But I did not forget. In the months that followed, I was quietly reassigned. My proximity to the Emperor and his sons diminished. My new duties concerned the human side of the crusade, the soldiers, the settlers, the forgotten billions who bled to build humanity's empire. I had been moved to the edges of history, where inconvenient truths are left to fade. The common soldiers, the newly compliant worlds, the careful spread of imperial culture and governance, important work, necessary work, but far from the true center of power. I told myself it was simply the natural rotation of duties. No single remembrancer could expect to document the Emperor of mankind directly for long. And yet, every shift, every reassignment, carried with it the subtle weight of absence, the absence of the truth I had once seen, now left behind in the shadows of history. But I knew the truth. I had seen what no mortal was meant to witness, remembered what no mind was meant to retain, and somehow he knew. As the great crusade pressed onward and the Emperor returned to Terra, I tried to believe the memory would fade, that his gaze would pass from me as history swallowed greater events. But I was wrong, terribly wrong. What I had seen on Ulanor was not an isolated miracle. It was the beginning of something far more profound and infinitely more terrible. Ulanor was only the first glimpse, an opening into an abyss so vast that even now, decades later, I struggle to comprehend its depth. But I must try. The truth demands to be told, no matter how dangerous, even if I am the last living soul who remembers it. The truth about the Emperor of mankind, about what he truly is, and what that means for all of us. In the days that followed the triumph at Ulanor, my nights were consumed by visions, strange, impossible dreams that clawed at the edges of my sanity. Each one carried the same weight, the same terrible certainty. The Emperor's gaze had never truly left me. They were not nightmares, not exactly. Yet each dream left behind a residue of dread that clung to me long after waking. In them, I found myself once more upon that dust-choked plain at Ulanor, the site of his triumph. But this time,
I was no longer an observer. I was the observed. Something vast and ancient watched me with an intensity that pierced through flesh and bone, reaching into the fragile core of my being. It was not hatred. It was not mercy. It was simply awareness, absolute and inescapable. And always, at the moment the orc was unmade, I would look down and see my own body begin to dissolve, not from the extremities inward, but from the inside out, as though the essential spark that made me was being methodically erased, leaving only a hollow shell behind. Each time, the physical form collapsed into dust, a silent echo of the incomprehensible power that had obliterated the greenskin. I could not move, could not speak, could not escape the knowledge of what it meant to be utterly exposed before the Emperor of mankind. I would wake gasping, clutching at my chest, desperate to confirm I was still whole, still myself. Each night left me scrambling through my own thoughts, terrified that some piece of me had been erased in my sleep. For weeks I told myself they were only dreams, echoes of trauma, the mind's attempt to impose order on the incomprehensible. But I was wrong, terribly wrong. After nearly a month, I understood. The visions were not madness. They were a message, a warning. What I had witnessed could never be unseen. What I now knew could never be unknown.
The knowledge could not be erased, but it could be buried, contained, sealed behind walls of fear and self-preservation. That was the choice laid before me: silence and life, or truth and obliteration. I chose silence. What else could I do? And so I continued my work, documenting the glory and triumphs of the Great Crusade, adding my hand to the sanitized, heroic accounts that would shape imperial history. Yet the memory of Ulanor and the reality I alone had witnessed remained alive in my mind, a secret too dangerous to reveal.
I continued recording humanity's manifest destiny among the stars, chronicling the glory of the Great Crusade. All the while, I carried a truth I dared not even think about directly, for fear that recollection alone might draw his attention once more. For a time, it seemed to work. The dreams gradually lessened in frequency, though they never disappeared entirely. I was permitted to continue my duties, always at a safe distance from the highest echelons of imperial power, yet never free from the lingering weight of what I alone had witnessed.
Life had gained a fragile veneer of normality. Then came the summons. 3 years after Ulanor, while attached to an expeditionary fleet led by the Imperial Fists, I received orders to return to Terra. No explanation accompanied the directive, no purpose stated. It was a command that could not be ignored, silent, absolute, and laden with implications I dared not speculate upon. The journey took weeks, weeks filled with endless speculation, each possible reason for my recall more terrifying than the last. By the time the transport entered the Sol system, I had convinced myself that I was being brought back not for duty, but for execution. Every star beyond the viewport seemed to whisper judgment, and the silent presence of the Emperor loomed heavier in my thoughts than ever before. Whatever grace period I had been granted was over. The reality, however, was both better and worse than I had feared. I was not met by custodians, nor by agents of the sigillite, but by a minor administrative functionary, a gray little man with a gray little voice, who calmly informed me that I had been reassigned to the Office of Chronological Accuracy and Factual Verification. A bureaucratic veil, seemingly benign, yet weighted with the subtle authority of the Emperor himself. It was a reminder that observation need not roar to command absolute compliance. The division I had been assigned to was part of the Remembrancer Order, tasked with reviewing and standardizing historical accounts before they entered the official record. In other words, I had become an editor, a reviser of other people's truths. My new workspace lay deep within one of the sprawling administrative complexes that had grown around the imperial palace, a small, windowless chamber lined with towering data stacks and cogitator terminals. My task was simple, in theory: ensure the chronicles of the Great Crusade reflected only the sanitized, heroic accounts deemed fit for the Imperium. But in practice, it was a constant exercise in restraint, memory, and quiet terror.
My task was to review Remembrancer accounts from across the Great Crusade, cross-check them against approved historical templates, and flag any inconsistencies or elements deemed problematic. I would then either correct them myself or forward them to higher authorities for resolution. In essence, I was being asked to sanitize history, to help construct the narrative that would replace reality itself. The irony was not lost on me. Every heroic account I polished, every truth I quietly buried, served to conceal what I alone had witnessed at Ulanor. I, who had witnessed truth itself being unmade before my eyes at Ulanor, was now tasked with unmaking the truths of others. It seemed less like promotion and more like punishment, a subtle cruelty, meticulously crafted by minds far beyond human scale. Every account I corrected, every heroic tale polished and sanitized, reminded me of the gulf between the reality I had seen and the narrative I was now forced to enforce. As the months passed, a pattern began to emerge in the materials that crossed my desk. Accounts of unusual phenomena, reports of the Emperor or the Primarchs demonstrating abilities that defied all conventional explanation, incidents where reality itself appeared to bend around their presence. Each of these anomalies was flagged for special attention, requiring the highest level of revision. Every record I altered was a quiet acknowledgement that the universe as mortals understood it was incomplete, and that some truths were far too dangerous to survive in their original form. In many cases, the original remembrancers themselves were quietly removed from duty, officially listed as having suffered psychological breakdowns or reassigned to remote, obscure posts where their accounts would reach no audience. I was not the only one who had glimpsed behind the veil. I was not the only one being silenced. This knowledge should have offered some comfort, shared burden, solidarity, and secrecy, but instead it only deepened my dread. The weight of forbidden truth pressed heavier with each passing day, a constant reminder of the gulf between what the Imperium celebrated and what it had truly witnessed. The scale of the deception was staggering, systematic, deliberate, and executed over years. Not the work of chance, but of meticulous design. What was being hidden,
And why? The question consumed me. In defiance of both orders and instinct, I began compiling my own private archive, copies of unrevised remembrancer accounts, records of which witnesses had been removed or reassigned, and patterns of revision that might hint at the true scope of what was being concealed. Each entry was a whisper of forbidden truth, a fragile beacon in the shadow of the Emperor's overwhelming dominion.
It was dangerous work, treasonous even. If discovered, it would mean my immediate elimination. I had no illusions about that. Yet something within me refused to accept the role of a silent accomplice in the Imperium's grand deception. If my memories were to be erased, if my existence reduced to a footnote of convenient history, then I would at least understand why. 6 months into my new assignment, my search for truth led me to a discovery so profound, so horrifying, that it nearly broke me. A revelation buried within layers of sanctioned lies, something the Emperor himself had ensured would never reach human eyes. Among the accounts flagged for extensive revision was a series of reports from a remembrancer attached to the Word-Bearer's Legion. The author, a woman named Cyrene Volantion, had documented the compliance of a world called Kur. According to the official record, the intervention was a reluctant but necessary use of force against a stubborn human culture that resisted peaceful integration into the Imperium. Yet in the original accounts, those I had uncovered in my secret archive, the story was far darker. What had been labeled compliance was something else entirely. An act of brutal domination sanitized for posterity. The lies were deliberate, precise, and chilling in their completeness. The official account framed the events as regrettable but justified, a necessary action in service of humanity's unification under the Imperium. The unrevised reports, however, told a different story. Brutality cloaked as compliance, violence sanitized as duty, lives erased, and histories rewritten to fit a narrative that served the powerful rather than the truth. Reading these hidden accounts, I understood the full scale of what had been hidden from the Imperium and from myself.
It spoke of the Emperor himself appearing before Primarch Lorgar, who had spent decades leading conquered worlds to worship his father as a god. The Emperor did not merely rebuke his son for this error. He forced the entire Word-Bearer's Legion to kneel in the ashes of a city they had built in his honor, a city he obliterated with a thought. And in that moment, as Lorgar wept in the dust, the Emperor did something to him. Something that transcended pain, punishment, or understanding. Something that revealed the incomprehensible nature of the being humanity called its master.
The Emperor did not strike Lorgar physically, nor did he speak words of reprimand. According to Cyrene Volantion's unrevised account, he acted with his will alone, rewriting something fundamental within the Primarch's mind, like a scribe correcting errors in a manuscript. The parallels to what I had witnessed at Ulanor were unmistakable. The same effortless, casual demonstration of power that defied comprehension. Reality bent without strain, and the Emperor's will alone shaped existence. The Emperor's authority extended beyond flesh, beyond matter, beyond reality itself. But what I read in Cyrene Volantion's account was far worse. This was not power wielded against a Xenos enemy. This was the Emperor reshaping the mind of his own son, altering Lorgar's very identity as effortlessly as editing words on a page. What kind of being could do such a thing?
The thought alone defied comprehension, and yet it was undeniable, an absolute display of control, unchallenged and total, that dwarfed even the might of the Primarchs themselves. What kind of father could wield such power? The questions were heretical, even as they took root in my mind. Once asked, they could not be unasked. They festered silently, while I dutifully revised Cyrene Volantion's account, replacing her horrified testimony with sterile reports of strategic redeployment and administrative restructuring. And all the while, I wondered, what does it mean for humanity to have a father who can reshape minds, unmake reality, and bend his sons to his will? The thought was unbearable, yet undeniable. If the Emperor could reshape the mind of a Primarch, one of his own genetically engineered sons, designed to resist psychic intrusion, what could he do to an ordinary human? What, I feared, had he already done to mine? The thought was paralyzing. Every memory, every secret, every hidden fear felt exposed to a power that made the strongest men and the most gifted Primarchs kneel in helpless awe. Reality itself seemed secondary to his will. Can I truly trust my own memories? If every thought can be rewritten without my knowing, then even doubt itself might be a trap, a built-in failsafe to expose me. I searched my mind endlessly, hunting for cracks in the illusion, inconsistencies, intrusions, anything that felt foreign. But in the end, I found nothing certain, only the chilling possibility that I was never truly in control.
They say absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, and that thought haunted me. The doubt didn't fade, it evolved, spreading like a shadow through every part of me. It became my constant companion, whispering, watching. Yet still, I kept working, trapped between belief and suspicion.
I kept building my secret archive, recording what I shouldn't, remembering what I wasn't meant to. I lived beneath the shadow of a truth I could neither fully recall nor entirely erase, a truth about the Emperor of mankind more terrifying than any sermon or scripture. He was no god, as humanity once imagined. He was something beyond divinity, beyond comprehension, a force for which no name exists. Whatever the Emperor truly was, and whatever designs he held for humanity, I grew certain they were not what we had been told. The deeper I served within Terra's endless bureaucracy, the clearer that truth became. As months turned into years, I perfected a quiet routine, one that hid my secret investigations beneath the veneer of loyal service, every movement calculated, every word measured. By day, I served the Imperium faithfully, preserving the official narrative, reciting the sanctioned truths. By night, I chronicled the reality they worked so hard to erase. Within the dim confines of my hab unit, I built a secret archive, data slates and handwritten notes hidden inside ordinary objects, each encrypted in a cipher of my own design. It was during these long, silent nights that I began to sense the eyes upon me, subtle, unseen, but always there. There were patterns I could no longer ignore. A servitor that passed my hab unit at precisely the same hour each night, data logs quietly recording which archives I accessed and for how long. Even in a silence of my workspace, I sometimes felt unseen eyes tracing my every move. Perhaps it was only paranoia, the inevitable side effect of carrying a truth too dangerous to exist.
One incident shattered any illusion that my fears were unfounded. I had been delving into the archives surrounding the Council of Nicaea, the moment when the emperor himself imposed limits on the psychic arts within the legions. The official record spoke of balance, of wisdom and restraint, of a reasoned council guided by divine insight. But as I read deeper, the story began to feel edited, too perfect, too clean, as though the truth had been buried beneath layers of sanctified lies. Magnus and his legion were officially censured for their over-reliance on the warp, and the Librarius program was preserved only in a limited, controlled form. Yet scattered among the obscure Remembrancer accounts were subtle hints, fragments of a story far more dramatic than the sanitized official records suggested. The deeper I probed, the clearer it became that much of the Emperor's carefully constructed narrative was a facade. Scattered accounts hinted at the Emperor's psychic prowess in ways the official records never revealed, feats that left even the most powerful of his sons trembling. Witnesses described his judgment as transcending mere speech. His voice bypassed the ears entirely, striking directly at the mind. Many were left physically reeling, bleeding from ears and eyes, a visceral testament to the terrifying authority he wielded. As I catalogued the growing list of contradictions, I sensed a presence, and when I looked up, a figure stood in the doorway. A custodian. His golden armor shimmered even in the half-light of my chamber, the guardian spear resting lightly at his side. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply watched, silent, expressionless, for exactly 37 seconds before turning away. No words were needed. The message was clear. I counted each second, frozen in my seat, my heart hammering as though it would burst. Then, without a word, the custodian turned and departed. The message was unmistakable. I could continue my work, for now, but I was not unobserved. That night, I destroyed a large portion of my archive. Not all of it. Some fragments I could not bring myself to erase, the secrets too vital, too dangerous, too illuminating to abandon entirely. I left just enough intact to maintain plausible deniability in case my quarters were ever searched. From that night onward, my investigations existed only within my mind. No records, no data slates, only memory, carefully structured into patterns and fragments no machine could decipher. But soon after that silent warning, the galaxy itself began to shift in ways none of us could have foreseen. Something vast was stirring, and the Emperor's long-hidden designs were beginning to unfold. Rumors began to circulate. Whispers of discord among the legions, friction between Primarchs, and of Horus Lupercal's rise at Ulanor to War Muster, pursuing the Great Crusade with a growing independence. Official channels dismissed these murmurs as exaggerations or misunderstandings, but the undertone of unrest was unmistakable, and I could feel its shadow creeping across the galaxy. Such were the natural frictions of a sprawling military machine spanning countless star systems, nothing for the average citizen to notice, nothing to suggest the Emperor's grand vision was faltering. But in my position, poring over reports from across the Imperium, a different pattern began to emerge. The discrepancies were subtle at first, expeditions failing to check in on schedule, unusual troop deployments, and anomalies that hinted at a hidden hand shaping events behind the scenes. Communications protocols were quietly altered, often without explanation. Then came the Istvan atrocity, the brutal purge of 3 loyal legions by their own brothers, and the revelation that Horus, the emperor's most favored son, had turned against him. The shock that tore through Terra was absolute. Even those of us who privately questioned the Imperium's narrative could not have imagined such a betrayal. The Great Crusade itself now hung on a knife's edge. The Primarchs were meant to be above such base impulses, the Emperor's vision made flesh, perfection incarnate. Yet if they could fall, what did that say about the vision itself? As chaos rippled through the Imperium and Terra braced for the possibility of war reaching the throne world, my duties shifted. The Office of Chronological Accuracy and Factual Verification was abruptly repurposed, its mission rewritten almost overnight, a subtle sign that the Empire itself was beginning to bend under the weight of the Horus heresy. We were no longer mere editors of history. We had become its architects, tasked with shaping a narrative that explained the unexplainable and justified the unjustifiable. Horus had been corrupted, we were told, tainted by Xenos influence or unknown warp entities lurking in the void. Every report, every record we crafted reinforced the story the Imperium wished the galaxy to believe, even as the true horrors remained buried beneath layers of sanctioned lies. Horus's brothers, those who'd followed him, were similarly deceived or coerced. This was no internal schism of the Imperium, but an external strike using internal vectors. The Emperor remained infallible, his vision untarnished. Any suggestion to the contrary was not merely wrong, it was dangerous, potentially sympathetic to the enemy. I did my duty. What choice did I truly have? I continued to shape the narrative, even as the truth gnawed at the edges of my conscience. I wrote the lies. I spread the propaganda. I helped craft the illusion that held the Imperium together, even as I suspected the truth was being hidden from us all. Each day, I shaped public perception of a war I no longer fully believed in. And yet, in secret, I continued my private investigation, tracing patterns, uncovering connections that few others were positioned to see or dared to acknowledge.
The pattern I uncovered was deeply unsettling. Nearly every instance of the Emperor demonstrating the reality-bending power I had glimpsed at Ulanor was followed, sometimes years later, by dysfunction or outright rebellion in those who had witnessed it. Exposure to his true nature seemed to corrode even the minds of his closest sons. Magnus's desperate psychic warning, which shattered the palace's warped defenses. Lorgar's gradual fall from the most devout to the first heretic, all were pieces of a disturbing puzzle pointing to the hidden cost of proximity to the Emperor's power. Angron's uncontrollable rage, Perturabo's festering resentment. Every one of them at some point had been subjected to direct psychic contact with their father, the Emperor. Each emerged altered, subtle at first, yet catastrophic in consequence. Was it merely coincidence, or did proximity to his true power leave an indelible mark, slowly unraveling even the mightiest of his sons? Or had they glimpsed, as I had, the truth behind the mask of humanity the Emperor wore? Something so fundamentally alien, so incomprehensibly beyond mortal conception, that even the most post-human minds could not endure it unchanged. I have no definitive answer, only conjectures, pieced together from fragments of suppressed truths, whispered hints, and hidden records long buried by the Imperium. I have come to believe that the heresy, which nearly shattered the Imperium, was not merely a political rebellion or a struggle for power.
It was a psychic immune response, a reaction to a presence too vast, too alien for even transhuman minds to safely comprehend. As the conflict escalated and the War Master's forces pressed toward Terra, my work grew desperate. The flow of information requiring sanitization surged into a torrent, each record, each report demanding careful shaping to preserve the Imperium's fragile narrative.
Reports flooded in of impossible feats performed by both loyal and traitor Primarchs, battles where reality itself seemed to twist and fracture. There were descriptions of entities from beyond normal space manifesting alongside rebel forces. Much of it could be dismissed as mass hysteria or battlefield confusion, yet buried within the chaos were threads of undeniable terror, glimpses of truths the Imperium could never officially acknowledge. Witnesses recounted the Primarchs and their legionaries transforming in both form and essence, their powers growing in ways that defied the laws of physics. Yet this newfound might came at a cost. Instability, extremity, and unpredictable behavior seeped into their every action. The more they manifested their extraordinary abilities, the further they drifted from the stable, controlled beings the Imperium had once believed them to be. It was as if the process the Emperor had used to create the Primarchs was now spiraling out of control, accelerating in some, reversing in others. Evolution and de-evolution unfolded simultaneously along different vectors. Beneath every account, a chilling pattern emerged. Reality itself was becoming increasingly malleable, bending to the force of will and belief, as though the very laws of the universe were subject to the influence of these superhuman minds. As the conflict intensified, the barriers between the materium and the immaterium grew thinner. It was during this period that the dream returned, the same vision that had haunted me since Ulanor. I stood on that dusty plain, witnessing the Emperor unmake the orc with a mere gesture, and felt myself begin to dissolve from within. Yet it was not oblivion that followed, as I had feared. Instead, I was absorbed, integrated, my consciousness entwined with something vast, alien, and incomprehensible. The constituent elements of my consciousness, the pattern I once recognized as myself, were drawn into a vast and intricate lattice of other minds. It was a psychic architecture of impossible scale and beauty, so immense that it dwarfed the physical universe around it. And at the center of this living network, binding every thought, every will, every flicker of existence together, was him, the Emperor, revealed not as a man, nor even as a god, but as a principle, a cosmic force of order and will, shaping reality through sheer consciousness. He was a fundamental force made manifest in human form, yet neither contained nor defined by it. In that vision, I finally understood his intent. The Great Crusade, the Primarchs, the entire Imperial project had been engineered not for conquest, not for unification, not even merely for species survival, but for transcendence. Humanity, guided and shaped by the Emperor, was being prepared to step beyond its limitations, to merge with a greater cosmic principle, and to partake in a reality far larger than itself. Humanity was never meant to remain a scattered collection of biological individuals, but to be elevated, transformed into a single unified consciousness capable of reshaping reality through collective will. A psychic apotheosis, with the Emperor as both catalyst and template. I awoke from that vision not in terror, but in awe.
And in that moment of crystalline clarity, I understood the truth. It had not been a dream born of my mind, but a transmission, a fragment of the Emperor's design reaching through the veil of sleep to reveal its purpose. A fragment of understanding took root in my consciousness. Whether it came directly from the Emperor or was the residual echo of the increasingly turbulent warp, I cannot say, yet its impact was undeniable. For the first time since Ulanor, I glimpsed not only the scope of the Emperor's power, but its purpose, a purpose both magnificent and terrifying beyond all human conception. The Great Crusade, the Primarchs, the Imperium itself were instruments of a design far greater than mere survival or conquest, aimed at a vision of humanity that was as sublime as it was horrifying.
We were never meant to remain as we were, isolated individuals with private thoughts and separate destinies. Humanity was raw material for something far greater, a new order of existence with the Emperor as its heart and mind. Some would call this divinity, others tyranny on a cosmic scale. I can no longer discern where one ends and the other begins. What I do know is that the scale of his design and our place within it is beyond mortal comprehension.
All I know is what I witnessed, what I have pieced together from fragments of suppressed truth and decades of reflection. The Emperor of mankind is not and never was human as we understand the word. Perhaps he was born of human stock in some forgotten age. Perhaps he walked among us for millennia as one of our own. But what he became, what he evolved into in order to guide and reshape our species, was something far beyond the human condition, something fundamentally other, a being who had transcended the limits of flesh, mind, and soul alike. A consciousness so vast, so intricately complex, that it demanded a physical vessel engineered specifically to contain it without unraveling into the warp. A being capable of perceiving, interpreting, and manipulating the fundamental structures of reality itself, not through technology or armies, but through sheer psychic will. This was the Emperor of mankind, a mind that dwarfed human comprehension and reshaped existence according to its design. An intelligence operating across scales of time and possibility so vast that our linear perceptions resemble the awareness of insects. This is what I believe I glimpsed at Ulanor, not merely a display of overwhelming psychic power, but a fleeting revelation of the Emperor's true nature. A brief, localized suspension of the psychic veil that ordinarily allows mortals to perceive him in a form they can comprehend, revealing the unfathomable line behind the facade. For that single moment, when he unmade the orc with a mere gesture, I believe the Emperor ceased his pretense of humanity. He abandoned the physical and temporal limitations that bind mortals, revealing to those present a truth few could comprehend. The Primarchs understood, I think, beings crafted from his very essence, engineered to channel fragments of his immeasurable power. What they witnessed was not a man, nor even a god, but a force that transcended all forms of mortal perception. The Primarchs recognized what had been revealed because it resonated with something buried deep within their post-human nature, a seed of the same transcendent potential that had fully flowered in their Creator. That is why they knelt, without command, not in worship nor out of fear, but from an instinctive recognition of an existential hierarchy as immutable and undeniable as the laws of physics themselves. Perhaps that fleeting glimpse of what they were ultimately made to become, the distance that still separated them from their intended final form, planted the first seeds of discord. To witness one's own potential future laid bare, to comprehend the path of transformation ahead and the inevitable loss of self it would entail, is a shock to any consciousness. Even beings of immense power, crafted to channel fragments of the Emperor's essence, were not immune to the terror of their own evolution. Even a Primarch, crafted for resilience beyond human limits, could be shaken by such revelations. For me, a mere unaugmented human, the insight was both limited and, paradoxically, survivable, precisely because I lacked the capacity to fully comprehend it. I glimpsed only the surface ripples of a disturbance in depths I could never fathom, yet even that partial perception was enough to alter the trajectory of my life forever. This revelation set me on a path of hidden inquiry and perilous knowledge. As Terra braced for siege and Horus's forces advanced through the Sol system, my work became urgent beyond measure. I was no longer merely sanitizing historical reports. I was actively shaping the narrative of unfolding events, choosing which aspects of the catastrophe would reach the public and which would remain hidden. It was a meticulous triage of information, a delicate balancing act that could determine how history remembered or concealed the Horus heresy. I carefully preserved what was deemed essential for morale and stability, while excising every detail that might provoke panic or shake confidence in the Emperor's ultimate victory. Every report, every record became a tool not just of documentation, but of control. The narrative I shaped was designed to maintain the Imperium's cohesion, even as the galaxy teetered on the brink of chaos. In truth, none of us could say whether victory was even possible. The scale of the calamity facing the Imperium was unprecedented. Half its armies had turned traitor. The Primarchs were divided, and warp travel was plagued by colossal storms. At the head of the traitor forces stood Horus Lupercal, once the brilliant commander of the Great Crusade, now turned against the empire he had helped forge. The galaxy itself seemed to teeter on the edge of annihilation, and the outcome remained uncertain.
Yet amid this galaxy-spanning darkness, a curious calm had settled over the imperial palace. While the forces of Horus advanced and the Imperium teetered on the brink of collapse, the throne of the Emperor remained undisturbed, a silent, immovable center around which the chaos swirled. It was a calm that was both reassuring and profoundly unsettling, a reminder of the incomprehensible power at the heart of the Imperium.
Those who worked closest to the Emperor reported no sign of distress or uncertainty from the master of mankind. He continued his enigmatic work deep within the imperial palace, emerging only occasionally to issue terse instructions to the Primarchs and generals orchestrating the defense. These rare appearances became the subject of intense scrutiny for those of us responsible for managing information. Rumors spread quickly, whispered among aides and scribes alike, each more speculative than the last, yet none could confirm the truth.
Some whispered that the Emperor was growing physically weaker, his energies consumed by the secret labors he conducted behind the palace's sealed doors. Others insisted he was evolving, shedding the final vestiges of humanity to meet the crisis with the full scope of his potential. The truth, as I reconstructed it from fragments of testimony and my own careful observations from a distance, was far more complex, a reality that defied simple interpretation and hinted at forces beyond even the Primarch's comprehension.
The Emperor was undeniably changing, though the nature of that transformation defied simple categorization. His physical form remained the same majestic figure that had led the Great Crusade, yet those admitted to his presence reported an increasing difficulty in maintaining direct awareness of him, as if their minds instinctively slid away from the reality of his existence unless deliberately focused. The more one tried to comprehend him fully, the more the mind strained, revealing the limits of mortal perception against his transcendent being. One account, swiftly suppressed upon receipt, described the emperor's presence as trying to look directly at a hole in reality, not a tear nor a wound, but an intentional absence, a place where the conventional laws of existence have been politely asked to make an exception. What struck me most about these reports was their uncanny consistency with what I had witnessed years earlier at Ulanor. The subtle, terrifying pattern of perception, the bending of comprehension itself, was recurring, proof that the Emperor's true nature remained beyond mortal understanding.
The same sense of reality, bending around a central point of will, persisted. The same suggestion of a power beyond conventional psychic comprehension. Yet now, that power was being channeled with unprecedented focus and purpose, directed toward an end none of us could fully grasp. In my official capacity, I was instructed to emphasize the Emperor's calm, confidence, and absolute control, to present an image of unshakable authority, even as the galaxy teetered on the brink of chaos.
I was tasked with presenting him as the immovable anchor of humanity's defense, the fixed point around which all resistance to the heresy revolved. This was not difficult. In every observable way, he embodied that role. Yet, in my private investigation, I began to suspect that his unshakable confidence did not arise from certainty of military victory, but from a perspective that encompassed the entirety of the heresy itself, a vision so vast that it placed every battle, every betrayal, every death into an order and purpose far beyond mortal comprehension.
Catastrophic though it was, the heresy appeared, at least from his perspective, to be merely a component of a far greater process, a necessary phase in humanity's guided evolution. This, I must stress, was conjecture on my part, dangerous conjecture that I dared share with no one. Yet it aligned disturbingly well with the fragments of revelation I had gathered over the years, with the recurring dream of humanity's psychic ascension, its transformation into something vast, unified, and utterly unlike the species that once walked beneath the stars.
Countless subtle actions and offhand comments from the Emperor suggested he was operating according to a timeline that extended far beyond the immediate crisis. As the siege of Terra commenced in earnest, with Horus's forces establishing orbit and beginning their relentless assault on the palace defenses, a new kind of report began filtering through my office. These accounts hinted at events and reactions that could only be understood if one assumed the Emperor's awareness encompassed not just the present, but the unfolding future of the Imperium itself. The Emperor's countless subtle remarks and actions suggested he was operating according to a timeline far beyond the immediate crisis. As the siege of Terra erupted, with Horus's forces establishing orbit and commencing their relentless assault on the palace defenses, a new type of report began filtering through my office. These accounts detailed occurrences that could only be understood by assuming the Emperor's awareness spanned not just the present, but the full arc of the conflict, revealing designs and foresight that dwarfed all mortal comprehension.
Reports arrived from the front lines describing phenomena that defied all conventional understanding. Reality itself seemed to warp around areas of intense conflict. Time flowed at different rates across the same battlefield. Matter behaved according to impossible laws, and wounds appeared that could not be explained by any known weaponry. The boundary between symbolic and literal reality blurred until the two became functionally indistinguishable, leaving soldiers and observers alike questioning what was real and what was manifestation of a greater psychic force.
Most of these reports I was instructed to dismiss as hallucinations induced by stress and fear, or as the effects of exotic weaponry and unknown Xenos technologies wielded by the traitors. But I knew better. I had witnessed the Emperor unmake an orc with a single gesture, had felt reality itself bend to his will at Ulanor. These new phenomena were simply the same principles at work on a vastly larger scale, albeit with far less precision. Reality responding to immense psychic forces unleashed during the siege of Terra.
As the conflict intensified, the veil between materium and immaterium thinned, and in this liminal state, raw will and belief began to shape reality itself. I came to understand that this was both the greatest danger of the Horus heresy and, perhaps, its true purpose. The forces at play were not merely physical or military, but psychic, a crucible where perception, faith, and power collided, reshaping existence in ways few could comprehend.
The true stakes of the Horus heresy were not the conquest of the Imperium or even the death of the Emperor, but the transformation of humanity's collective psychic potential into a weapon of unimaginable power, a force capable of reshaping reality itself. Horus sought to wield this power for his own ascension, while the Emperor intended it for a far greater, more deliberate purpose. Caught between these two transhuman wills, reality itself began to buckle under the strain, warping and twisting in ways no mortal could fully comprehend.
The culmination of this conflict, the climactic confrontation between father and son, is a matter of historical record, or at least the official version of it. The Emperor, accompanied by his most loyal Primarchs, teleported directly onto Horus's battle barge. They fought desperately through corrupted decks, culminating in a final duel in which the Emperor was grievously wounded, yet ultimately triumphant. Horus was utterly destroyed, his body and soul annihilated, leaving the galaxy to bear the scars of his rebellion.
The costly victory left the master of mankind a broken shell, sustained only by the miraculous technology of the Golden Throne. This was the narrative I was tasked with constructing in the aftermath, the official version spread across the Imperium during the years of Reconstruction. A tragic epic of sacrifice and Pyrrhic triumph, it became the foundation myth for 10,000 years of imperial rule, cementing the emperor as both savior and martyr in the collective consciousness of humanity. The official account contains elements of truth, but it is far from complete. I was not aboard the vengeful spirit and did not witness the final confrontation between the emperor and his fallen son. Very few did, and fewer still survived to report what they had seen. Yet in my position, I had access to the unfiltered accounts of those who returned, fragments of truth that revealed details deliberately omitted from the sanctioned narrative. These reports painted a far more complex and unsettling picture of the final moments of the Horus heresy.
These accounts were gathered before the official narrative hardened, before the ecclesiarchy codified the emperor's divinity, and before the brutal efficiency of a secular empire gave way to the Baroque theocracy of the modern Imperium.
Fragmentary and often contradictory, they nonetheless revealed a version of events that diverged sharply from the accepted history, offering glimpses of a more complex, terrifying, and morally ambiguous reality behind the siege of Terra and the Horus heresy.
These early accounts did not describe a simple physical duel between the Emperor and Horus, though such a confrontation may have been the way it appeared to mortal or limited transhuman senses. Instead, they detailed a conflict spanning multiple levels of existence simultaneously, a battle of wills that manifested in the material world but was ultimately decided on a psychic plane beyond conventional comprehension. This was not merely a fight for survival, but a clash of consciousnesses, with consequences rippling across reality itself. According to the most coherent of these testimonies, provided by a severely wounded custodian who had accompanied the Emperor aboard the battle barge, the final moments of the confrontation were marked by a profound stillness. Horus and the Emperor faced each other across a chamber, twisted and warped by energies no mortal was meant to control. Around them, time itself seemed to pause, not frozen, but holding its breath, as if the universe waited to see which way the fulcrum of history would tilt. Then the Emperor did something wholly unexpected, an act that defied both the tactical logic of the moment and the strategic necessities of the war. He hesitated. Despite all that Horus had wrought, the trillions lost, the Imperium engulfed in flames, the dream of the Great Crusade shattered, despite his loyal sons slain by their brother's treachery, despite standing on the precipice of total defeat, he paused, as if weighing forces far beyond mortal comprehension. The Emperor hesitated. According to the custodian's testimony, this was not out of lingering sentiment or a paternal reluctance to destroy his finest creation. Rather, it was a moment of genuine uncertainty, as though the master of mankind, architect of humanity's future and shaper of the species' destiny, had encountered a crossroads he had not anticipated. He faced a choice whose consequences, even for a being of his intellect and foresight, could not be fully calculated. A moment where the weight of the Imperium's fate pressed against his very consciousness. In that moment of hesitation, Horus struck, not merely with physical force, though some blow surely landed on the Emperor's corporeal form, but psychically, channeling the combined might of his transhuman will and the warp entities that had empowered his rebellion. The strike should have been decisive. By all accounts, it very nearly was. The Emperor was grievously wounded in ways that transcended ordinary physical trauma. His body and mind pushed to the limits of what even a being of his power could endure. His essence, the immense psychic architecture I had glimpsed in my dream vision, was sundered along fault lines that may have existed since his transformation from human into something far greater. Yet in that moment of near destruction, when Horus's victory seemed inevitable, something shifted. Forces beyond mortal comprehension intervened, preserving the Emperor from total annihilation and setting in motion the events that would stabilize both his being and the Imperium itself. The custodian's account becomes increasingly symbolic and steeped in religious imagery, as if attempting to convey sensory experiences far beyond the capacity of even augmented human perception. Yet the core truth aligns with fragments I have gathered over decades. At the moment of his greatest vulnerability, the Emperor ceased holding back. Unleashing the full extent of his power, he transformed the confrontation into an event that was simultaneously physical, psychic, and existential.
a culmination that reshaped both his being and the fate of the Imperium. He stopped limiting himself to forms and functions comprehensible to human or even transhuman minds, no longer pretending to be merely the most powerful being in the galaxy. He simply was, in totality, whatever he truly is. The effect was cataclysmic. Reality within the chamber collapsed entirely, resolving into what the custodian could only describe as absolute negation, followed by perfect definition. This was the Emperor unbound, an existential force reshaping the very nature of existence at the apex of the Horus heresy. The Emperor brought about the end of all possibility, and from that collapse arose a single inevitable truth. When conventional perception returned, Horus was gone. Not merely dead, defeated, or banished, but erased. His existence, his pattern, had been excised from the underlying structure of reality itself, silencing even the warp entities that had empowered him. Yet the cost of this act was equally absolute, leaving the Emperor grievously wounded and dependent on the miraculous technology of the Golden Throne to preserve what remained of his being. The Emperor, having manifested an aspect of his true nature too vast for even his engineered form to contain, was reduced to a state beyond death, yet short of life. His consciousness fragmented, his power scattered across dimensions, and his physical form left a broken vessel, preserved only by the most extreme technological intervention. Thus began his existence upon the Golden Throne, a precarious balance between mortality and omnipotence, sustaining both the Imperium and the psychic lattice of humanity itself. The Golden Throne, originally conceived for a purpose far different in the Emperor's grand design, became both his life support system and prison. It anchors the fragments of his fractured consciousness, preventing their dissolution into the warp, while maintaining the essential psychic functions required for humanity's survival. This, I believe, is the hidden truth at the heart of the Horus heresy, the real foundation of the modern Imperium, built upon sacrifice, deception, and the incomprehensible scale of the Emperor's will. This was not a simple conflict between loyalty and treachery, nor a straightforward tale of a father betrayed by his son. It was something far more profound and disturbing, a pivotal moment in a species-level transformation orchestrated across millennia by a being whose true nature and intentions remain fundamentally unknowable to those he sought to elevate. The process of humanity's directed evolution was derailed not by the rebellion itself, but by the unexpected choices made in the final moments of the Horus heresy. Choices that reshaped the trajectory of the Imperium and the very nature of human potential. Through decades of secret research and perilous investigation, I have pieced together these forbidden truths, drawn from fragments of erased testimony, coded messages buried in imperial archives, and my own fleeting glimpse beyond the veil at Ulanor. What I have uncovered defies sanctioned history and shatters the illusion of the Imperium's divinity. And for that knowledge I have lived in constant fear. For to even know this much is a crime against the throne, to speak it aloud, heresy in its purest form. Yet, as my own end draws near, I feel compelled to record these insights. Not as definitive truth, how could any mortal claim to fully comprehend the designs of a being so vast, but as a warning, and as a perspective that may prove valuable to those who come after. One certainty remains: the Emperor is not dead. His presence endures, guiding humanity in ways the masses cannot perceive, sustaining the Imperium through forces beyond comprehension. Nor is the Emperor truly alive in any conventional sense. He exists in a state beyond ordinary categories, his consciousness both fragmented and unified across multiple planes of existence. The golden throne preserves the remnants of his material form while anchoring his dispersed essence, sustaining the psychic lattice that safeguards humanity. This delicate balance ensures that though physically broken, the Emperor continues to shape the Imperium's fate from a state beyond mortal comprehension. Yet despite this fractured state, the Emperor's power remains incalculable. The Astronomicon continues to burn, guiding humanity across the galaxy for over 10,000 years, fueled by the psychic energy he still generates. The creation and oversight of the Sisters of Silence, the relentless defense against warp incursions, all of it is sustained by whatever fraction of his true potential remains accessible. Even broken, the Emperor's influence shapes the Imperium in ways beyond comprehension, a living anchor for a species teetering on the brink of cosmic peril. I have often pondered, in the decades since the Horus Heresy, whether this outcome was genuinely unanticipated by the Emperor. Perhaps the apparent failure of his grand design is, paradoxically, its fulfillment by other means. Consider the Imperium as it stands today, a galaxy-spanning theocracy devoted to a single figure of worship, sustained by devotion, faith, and the psychic power of the Emperor himself, a far-reaching mechanism to steer humanity toward an end only he could comprehend. Trillions of souls are directed toward a unified purpose, their collective psychic potential amplified and focused through religious devotion, faith, and ritual. Human consciousness is subtly guided along prescribed paths, generation after generation, forming a vast interconnected lattice of psychic energy. This disciplined channeling sustains the Imperium, fuels the Astronomicon, and perpetuates the Emperor's vision in ways that even the most powerful minds of the galaxy can scarcely comprehend. Is this not, in a sense, the species-level psychic unification I glimpsed in my vision, though not achieved through the Remendo? The Emperor's original vision of enlightened, secular progress has been supplanted by the brute evolutionary pressure of endless warfare and the disciplined psychic focusing of religious faith. The methods differ, the time frame has stretched across millennia, and the human cost is incalculably higher. Yet the outcome, a unified, galaxy-spanning psychic potential, may still be the fulfillment of his grand design.
Yet the vector remains consistent with what I believe was the Emperor's ultimate goal: the elevation of humanity into a unified psychic entity, capable of reshaping reality through its collective will. Across millennia, the Imperium's faith, devotion, and ritual have been forging this latent potential, channeling the psychic energies of trillions into a lattice that sustains the Emperor's vision and prepares humanity for a future that few can even imagine.
What we perceive as the Imperium's 10,000-year decline into superstition and stagnation may in fact be a necessary stage in a process still unfolding according to the Emperor's design. A cocoon phase in which humanity's latent potential gestates, shielded by layers of ignorance, dogma, and ritual from forces it is not yet ready to confront directly. If this conjecture holds merit, it casts a profoundly disturbing light on the nature of the being we call the Emperor, a master architect whose vision extends far beyond human comprehension. I am left to ponder the staggering depth and breadth of foresight such a plan would demand, and the moral calculus required to justify the incalculable suffering wrought in service of that end. Questions of intent and ethics that lie far beyond my understanding, and which I am not qualified to answer. The Emperor's vision, operating across millennia and spanning trillions of lives, remains a puzzle whose scale and consequence defy comprehension. These are questions perhaps no human mind is equipped to formulate, let alone resolve. All I know with certainty comes from what I witnessed on that dusty plain at Ulanor. The casual unmaking of an enemy with a mere gesture, the absolute authority over reality itself, a power that would make gods tremble and mortals wish they were blind. And yet, even that display, awe-inspiring though it was, represents only the merest fraction of what the Emperor truly is, a being whose scale, will, and purpose remain far beyond human comprehension. A momentary, localized relaxation of the psychic constraints that normally allow the Emperor to interact with conventional reality without annihilating it. In that instant, his true nature brushed against the material plane, revealing glimpses of a power so vast and alien that even the most augmented minds could scarcely process it. What I have come to believe, after decades of hidden inquiry and perilous reflection, is that the being we call the Emperor of mankind may represent the first of a new order of existence. Neither human nor God as we have understood those concepts. He is a principality of consciousness extending across dimensions, operating according to laws and principles far beyond our comprehension. His very nature transcends mortal understanding, and the true scope of his purpose remains shrouded in mystery. The Emperor may have been the first, but not the last. I believe humanity was intended to follow, to transcend its current limitations and join him in whatever state of existence he has pioneered. This was the purpose of the Great Crusade, the reason for the Imperial Truth, and the goal of the Webway Project. All components of a grand design meant to shepherd our species through an evolutionary threshold no purely organic intelligence has ever survived. Every campaign, every project, every doctrine was a step toward the emergence of a transhuman collective, guided by the Emperor's unparalleled foresight. Perhaps it still is. Perhaps even now, shattered and enthroned upon the golden throne, the Emperor continues to guide humanity along that path, through methods too subtle and circuitous for us to recognize. Perhaps the Imperium itself, in all its brutal, oppressive, and fanatical glory, is still performing the function it was designed for. The slow, millennia-long elevation of our species toward a unified, transhuman psychic potential.
Or perhaps the design has truly failed. Perhaps we are alone, adrift in a galaxy of nightmares, with only the fractured echoes of an unfathomable being shielding us from extinction. I do not know. I cannot know. Such truths lie beyond the reach of minds still chained to linear time and material law. All I possess is this, a single, fragile glimpse behind the veil of reality, and the haunting certainty that what I saw was never meant for human eyes.
The forbidden memories I was never meant to hold still haunt me. Fragments of truth I was never meant to see.
Now, standing at the edge of death, I carry these dangerous revelations with me, torn between terror and a strange, quiet peace. If my suspicions about the Emperor are true, if he truly sees across dimensions and moves through time itself, then our entire existence may be nothing more than one small thread in his vast, unfathomable design.
Then perhaps the Emperor has always known that I would remember Ulanor, that I would devote my life to uncovering the truths buried beneath the imperial facade, that I would one day record these forbidden thoughts for others to find. And still he allowed it. The question that consumes my final days is not how, but why. Why would the Emperor permit such dangerous knowledge to exist at all, even in the faintest, most hidden corners of the Imperium? Why would the Emperor allow even one insignificant remembrancer to glimpse behind the veil, however faintly? Perhaps the truth is far simpler, that my existence, my investigations, my words are too trivial to matter. To a being who perceives eternity itself, I am nothing more than a flicker, an anomaly unworthy of correction, a whisper lost in the endless storm of his design. Or perhaps, and this realization chills me to the core, the fragments of forbidden insight I carry are not mistakes, but deliberate threads in the Emperor's unfathomable design. Maybe doubt itself is essential to humanity's evolution, a counterweight to blind faith, a spark of cognitive diversity in a species being molded for ultimate unification. Every secret remembered, every heretical thought preserved, may serve a purpose far beyond my understanding. I do not know, I cannot know, and soon I too will fade, one among the countless dead whose minds dissolve back into the vast design of the cosmos. Yet, before oblivion claims me, I must leave this record, a final testament of what I witnessed on Ulanor and the truths uncovered through a lifetime of forbidden inquiry. The Emperor's power is not bound to mere creation or destruction, though he commands both when necessity demands. His true strength lies in something far greater, an influence that threads through reality itself, shaping thought, faith, and fate across the ages.
It is not psychic dominance, nor the mastery of technology, though such instruments lie easily within his grasp. No, the Emperor's true power transcends all mortal comprehension. It is dominion over reality itself, the authority to bend existence, to command the fabric of the universe as though it were thought made manifest. A power so absolute that even gods would tremble before it, and men would pray for blindness rather than behold its full truth. Whatever the Emperor truly is, whatever destiny he envisions for humanity, I know this much. It is far greater, stranger, and more terrifying than anything our mortal minds can imagine. Even now, 10,000 years after his mortal body was shattered and his vast consciousness scattered across the warp, I can still feel his presence moving through the Imperium. His awareness flows like a current through time and thought, perceiving patterns that no human soul could ever begin to comprehend. He moves unseen, nudging events along paths we can neither predict nor control, guiding humanity toward a destiny beyond comprehension. Or perhaps, far more terrifying, he merely watches as we struggle and perish in our trillions, allowing the merciless forces of evolution to grind us into whatever form we are meant to become. This is what I believe, the conclusion drawn from a lifetime of perilous inquiry and forbidden experience. I do not claim it as truth, only as the vision of one who has glimpsed too much and understood too little. How could I ever claim to understand the mind of such a being? I offer only perspective, the testimony of one who, for a fleeting and imperfect moment, glimpsed beyond the veil that hides the emperor's true nature. After 10,000 years of worship, we still do not comprehend him. The emperor of mankind is power made manifest, living divinity forged in flesh and light. Yet the purpose behind that power and the reason it has shaped humanity across the millennia remains the greatest and most terrifying mystery in our existence. And so, I leave this mystery for others to ponder as I fade beyond the reach of his golden light. Whether what awaits is the true dissolution of self or the merging into some greater cosmic design, I go willingly, my eyes open, my mind forever scarred by the truths I have seen. I am Jalen Marr, last witness of Ulanor, who beheld the Emperor unveil but a fraction of his true essence. I saw him unmake an enemy with a single gesture, not through rage or force, but through the effortless command of reality itself. I felt his gaze pass through me, an all-consuming awareness that laid bare every thought, every secret I had ever held. In that moment, I understood the terrible truth. The being we call the master of mankind is far greater and far more dreadful than the God we have chosen to worship. Remember this, should my words endure beyond my death. The Emperor's light does not simply illuminate, it reveals, it judges, and it remakes all who stand before it. The Emperor protects. Yet what he shields us from, why he does so, and at what ultimate cost, are questions whose answers would shatter the Imperium more completely than any external foe ever could. Under his light, we live and die according to designs beyond our comprehension. Perhaps in this unknowable guidance lies the true measure of his power. For what authority could be more absolute than that which needs no explanation, no justification, no witness? What dominion could be more absolute than one that shapes the perceptions of its subjects? What power more fearsome than that which can unmake reality with a single thought, or bend the minds of demigods with but a glance? From a lifetime of forbidden inquiry and perilous reflection, I leave this final truth. The Emperor is not a tyrant because he rules through force. His authority is far subtler, far more profound. A dominion that bends all existence to his will without ever needing to strike. He is a tyrant not because he rules through cruelty or command, but because, to him, there is no boundary between will and reality. What he desires simply is. The future he envisions for humanity unfolds not by decree, but as the inevitable expression of his existence, the laws of creation bending to match his intent. This is the truth I glimpsed at Ulanor, the revelation that has haunted me for 60 years. And now, as I yield to whatever void or unity lies beyond death, I surrender that understanding, the final echo of a mind that saw too much. The Emperor of mankind is not a god masquerading as human. He is something infinitely more terrifying. He is the universe itself, conscious and purposeful, choosing to manifest in human form for reasons beyond our comprehension. Every loyal servant, every traitor, every life in the Imperium is but a pattern in the vast, unfolding tapestry of his design, threads woven into a plan that stretches across time, space, and reality itself.